Yeah, clever bit of work there.
Oh, nice. Really nice D from Marcellus.
Great defense. And he got it with the right.
Holy cow.
He is fired up. So are we. Oh, my goodness. The crowd reacting so strongly to that as well. Walker, front of the end zone, red zone.
Oh, it's Scuber.
Scuber's out of trouble. Walker with steps. Walker, one hand, pulls it down. Oh, my goodness. What an exciting finish here to this game. 8 seconds.
Welcome back. Final weekend of the 2023 AUDL regular season. We're at week 13, and we've got the biggest slate of the entire year coming up. 14 whole games. The weekend actually stretches all the way to Tuesday, thanks to a makeup game between Dallas and Carolina. But there are still 2 playoff spots left available in the East and West divisions, and a boatload of divisional rivalry games and a lot of confidence builders for teams looking to build into the 2024 season who won't necessarily be competing for playoff spots here and now. I am Adam Ruffner. That is Daniel Cohen. We're going to get right into it like we always do, talking about the premier matchup of the weekend out on the West Coast. Friday night's game of the week. First time ever, I believe, we've had a Friday night game of the week between the Oakland Spiders and the Los Angeles Aviators. Oakland improving to 7-3 after they got an all-important overtime win at home, 20-19 over the Aviators just last weekend. Absolute thriller once again in Oakland. They're definitely the cardiac kids out by the bay. Aviators fall to 6-5 on the verge of missing the playoffs, but if they get a win tomorrow night and get a little help from San Diego on Saturday, as Oakland will have to play 2 games in the final weekend to secure their playoff bid, Aviators could still make it into the postseason. Oakland, meanwhile, with a win on Friday, would clinch a playoff berth. And then on Saturday, if they get a win against Oakland, they would clinch a home field playoff game, all important in the first round, and they would host the 8-4 Colorado Summit. And if you all remember, the Oakland Spiders took care of Colorado just a few weeks ago at home. The Spiders clearly have a very special energy inside that venue. So it will set up one of the most intriguing playoff battles ever and one of the most unexpected, I think, 2 seeds, given where Colorado came from last year and still given the level of talent that they have this year. But the 4 losses that they sustained could prove poisonous to them hosting a playoff game. They will be rooting for the Aviators and San Diego all weekend. Daniel, what are you most looking forward to going into this LA matchup? We both talked about before the game. We have a slight favor for LA, given how they looked in the first half, given that they're a team that seems to be bound by veteran leadership and the ability to bounce back. They did it earlier this season after they started 1-3. Aviators now host a game. They return veteran Chris Mazer, who could stabilize their defensive unit that wasn't quite good enough in converting their break opportunities last weekend. Where are your thoughts heading into tomorrow night's big game of the week matchup?
First of all, I just love that, like, how often do we get a doubleheader road trip where both of the games are, like, so critical for the playoff implications in the very last week of the season? Like, there's so many different outcomes that are possible regardless of what happens in this Oakland LA game, right? Like, both games are obviously super important regardless of results. So I'm just excited about that in general. Just these Oakland games are always fun to watch, like as they are, just with Oakland as a team. And then LA and San Diego are going to bring a lot of heat to the SoCal area this weekend. I think LA, in my mind, they do play a much cleaner style than Oakland. And whereas, like, I think coming into last weekend, I was just interested in who would play cleaner offense between those teams. That didn't really matter, right? It was just like chaos in the second half.
There was 57 combined turnovers. LA actually won the turnover battle 27-30. Right. Neither team won, actually, in that regard when you're committing 57 combined turnovers, and both teams converted under 50% on offense. It was, as we always like to say, a rock fight out by the bay.
Yeah, and that's to put it lightly. I mean, yeah, LA converted 48% on offense, Oakland 31%, and it was amazing how much of a split of halves that was in that game, where it was such an enormous second half rally from Oakland, and I mean, we can call it a collapse from LA, right? Like they looked so in control for most of that game. And I don't know, just like a bad string of errors when they really couldn't afford them in the fourth quarter that allowed Oakland to come back. So it's obviously the 4-quarter consistency that I'm really focusing in on for LA. And I do think that they have it in them. Like we've seen them play very complete, very efficient games. Oakland, I think recently has gotten maybe a little bit looser with their turnovers. They had 30 against Portland in their previous game. So I still just go into this game trusting LA a little bit more to take care of the disc. And I think without that home energy behind Oakland, maybe we don't see that same second half rally this time around.
I mean, there are some frankly crazy stats from last weekend's matchup between Oakland and LA. As I already alluded to, LA technically won the turnover battle by 3 and yet lost the game by 1. They converted at a higher offensive efficiency rating, I believe 48%, compared to Oakland's season low 32%
Yep, 31.
offense, something around there. Low 30s, not good. That is good for springtime temperatures, not offensive conversion rates. Oakland won the fourth quarter in overtime by a score of 7-2, speaking of the collapse. And then one of the most interesting just dichotomies in terms of the Spiders' success and kind of, I think, really captures how much they feed off of energy transitions, sort of momentum plays. The Oakland defense for the game, 8 of 10 on break opportunities, 80% break conversion. The team in the red zone, 17 of 25, an atrocious 68% conversion rate. They got an astounding 25 looks inside the 20-yard line at the end zone, only converted on 17 of them. That's to get 25 red zone looks and only score 20 points in 5 quarters of play. That's not great. Those aren't great efficiency numbers. And yet at the same time, this is an Oakland team that has done this now a few times, specifically at home, and it's just who they are. And they very much own that identity. And to their credit, they do something to these visiting teams at home in the second half, where they play with such an intensity. They have so many different lines and fresh legs that they are confident throwing out there. Again, hats off to Dan Silverstein for his ability to kind of rotate in these lineups that maybe haven't played together to that point in the game yet. And he will just roll them out and let them do an offensive drive if the offense has gotten broken a couple times. Or he'll rotate in a second line of defenders that is usually composed of like teenagers and people in their young 20s as one of the youngest teams in the league, and letting them just get out there, get some reps, get some confidence against these bigger teams in the West Division. And you see in this latter half push that they're making towards the postseason that they've really got the juice to sustain themselves in the second half. I mean, LA, as we've said, was the more veteran team. They looked like the more talented team for the first 2.5, 3 quarters of this game. And yet that simply doesn't matter with the energy that the Spiders can overwhelm teams with in the third, fourth, and overtime quarters. And I just think that that's such a credit to kind of where their discipline is. You can't say that it's with the disc, right? With these 60 turnovers in the last 2 games. But at the same time, it doesn't play outside of who they are. And I know that that's like a bit specious, woozy, kind of ooh-woo language to use around this stuff. We're very analytical, data-driven sports people here. But at the same time, that's what the Spiders bring, right? It's these 3 different team-wide celebrations that they have. It's the running off of the sideline after every single break score. It's the clear way that the number 1 player in any given lineup respects the 20th active player on the roster just as much. Like there is no team, I think, that likes playing with itself more than Oakland, other than maybe the reigning champs, right? Like this is a Spiders team that is just bought in, and they continue to overcome whatever mistakes they might make as a youthful, inexperienced lineup with just some bodacious playmaking. We were talking about it right before taping. It's not, these are semi-collapses by the visiting teams. Like there's no denying that, given some of the scoring disparities of the second half and the just wheels coming off nature that like the Aviators looked in the fourth quarter, where they just couldn't get out of these Oakland double team sideline traps without a huge degree of difficulty. But at the same time, like this isn't an Oakland team just picking up a throwaway or converting 5 yards outside their end zone. This is a Spiders team that is playmaking and closing out these games with their own confidence and chutzpah. Like they're taking advantage of these moments. And I think that sets them up really well here for essentially just needing a split, at least in order to qualify for the playoffs for the first time since 2017. Like this is been kind of a realization of the complete rebuild that has happened after they were the first team ever to win back-to-back titles in 2014 and 2015, their first two seasons in the league, right? Like it's cool to see the Spiders finally re-summiting and re-engaging as a contender in this league. This is one of the most storied teams in the league, and they still have, I think, a few members from those championship rosters on the lineup still, and Justin Norton, Matt Crawford, they're still there kind of speaking to these younger upcomers as to what to expect in these games that they haven't played in for over half a decade.
Should we talk about the Silverstein quote from this past week's Tuesday toss? I've got it pulled up here. I think it's easy to look at the Spiders, see how they fall behind, and think that's a young team playing inconsistent. I see a team that doesn't give up and routinely fights back in the second half, even when things are looking ugly at the time. That's a young team playing above its age. So it sounds like you tend to side in that thinking, right? Like you want to give them credit for rallying down the stretch. But like, at what point do the inefficiencies just catch up to a team? Because like, I don't know, I kind of think about their ability to play with Colorado and with Salt Lake, and those are two teams that can just like really out efficient, both on offense and defense, whoever their opponent is. So like, can that mentality for the Spiders get them so far, I guess, both this weekend and then into the playoffs if they make it?
Well, kind of a sideways answer to what you're asking, but I think that's what's so important about Oakland going 2-0 on the weekend and getting that home field playoff spot. I don't know that this travels well, right? Like they have sort of struggled on the road. That is how they got to 0-5 to begin last year too. They were a team that committed the same sorts of errors and had the same sort of energy. This year, they've added a few more playmakers. There's been a few evolutions on their roster. Evan Magson, Keenan Lawrence, Robin Vickers-Batsdorf, the guys last year who were looking like they might mature into something have really come of age this year, even as they're still well before their primes. I think that's a fantastic sign and definitely speaks to Silverstein's quote about a team playing beyond its years. And obviously they've been impressive in that respect, but I think where the rubber meets the road, or where there might be some friction here, is if they go 1-1 on the weekend, or as we've talked about, if they drop that LA game on Friday. It's going to be a fantastic test for Oakland on Saturday against San Diego in San Diego. We were talking about this Growlers team is going to be near full strength. They have not had their season, right? Like this is a 2-9 Growlers team. They've struggled to win of late. They're dropping a lot of games. They just dropped 2 in the Pacific Northwest, gave Portland their first win of the season, gave a 29 on the road in Seattle the next day. The Growlers are certainly backpedaling a bit, but I can guarantee you from the way that this franchise operates that they are dead set in kind of ending their season on a high note and at least ending with a W. And I think that that's a real trouble spot for an Oakland team that frankly hasn't, again, been here in quite a while. Like they've gotten to this point to this season because I think in the milieu and the melee of the regular season, there's a lot of week-to-week churn. You could see how they really took advantage of Colorado losing in Salt Lake on Friday in order to seize that second half surge that they had against the Summit on Saturday, taking advantage of the traveling team's fatigue. Again, this is an opportunistic Oakland team. If they are tired and if they are reeling in a bit of their confidence, I'm going to be really interested to see if they can respond how they have been in individual games in that second game of a doubleheader against the Growlers. Because again, like the Growlers present a pretty significant challenge. Travis Dunn, Stephon Samu, Paul Alley, Max Gibson, they can perform on offense. Their defense is going to run with you. They're young. They can be susceptible to coverage lapses in the back end, especially. They gave up a ton of hucks to the Cascade last weekend. Oakland definitely likes to huck it. They like to get out and run, so that could be a problem. But again, the Growlers could take advantage of an Oakland team that may have given its best effort on Friday. Like, I'm just interested to
Right.
see that this is a real identity challenger for an Oakland team that has kind of succeeded on almost its identity above execution and talent so far, right? Like to Silverstein's own quote, this is a team that is playing beyond its years. And so when does that sort of magic maybe wear away a bit? Like what is sort of underneath that, I guess I'm getting at. And I think this weekend will really reveal that, right? Like how will this Oakland team respond to being on the inside track, not being the underdog, not being able to be plucky in front of their home crowd, but on the road, 2 games against the teams you played the most over the last decade. What are you going to bring? Like, I think that that's a fantastic question for the Spiders team to be facing as they might qualify for the postseason. And on the flip side, I think it's terrific for LA too, right? Like, LA is still alive. And, you know, again, if Oakland slips on Friday, I would say that that makes them a little bit more susceptible on the road on Saturday. I think, again, this is a Spiders team that excels on confidence. So what's going to happen if they, you know, don't just lose by a goal or 3, but if Aviators kind of put up a 21-15 effort and really send Oakland packing into a do or die matchup against the Growlers? Like, I think this is a terrific opportunity for an Aviators team that clearly has a lot of talent, clearly has a lot of veteran leadership, and clearly had a surge where they really started to care in the middle of the season. You know, there's the famous Pavel quote back about a month about McDougal lighting a fire under his butt and everything about that. But, you know, this is an LA team that is certainly pushed for a playoff seed maybe a year before we really expected them to qualify for one. And the fourth quarter collapse aside, I think that they have it in them to definitely respond this weekend. And they're going to be a little bit healthier and a little bit more tooled up this weekend than they were last.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you. From a confidence standpoint, if Oakland drops that game to LA, like all of a sudden they're staring, missing the playoffs altogether in the face. Whereas going into the weekend, they could have come out as the 2 seed. So that is going to be tough. I think the San Diego game it's like I'm arguably more excited for the San Diego game than I am for the LA game. Not that I think the LA Oakland game is going to be like bad or that I think LA is like for sure going to win. But the San Diego game, when San Diego went up to Oakland, that was a really close game through 3 quarters. And then because Oakland had that home crowd energy behind them, they went on a 7-4 run in the 4th quarter to close things out, and they won by 4. I just think there's so much, like, I don't think there's a stronger discrepancy in like home field advantage right now than what the Spiders have in the entire league right now. So getting to go on this road trip and actually see, I mean, I know we've seen them on the road, right? Like we saw them beat Seattle and Portland early in the season, and we did see them play really well against Salt Lake and Colorado. Of course, both those were losses, but yes, they did have good games against them. So like on paper, I do think they should be fine this weekend, but like with the recent inefficiencies and just the fact that it is this big long road trip and a doubleheader and a lot of pressure this weekend is on a super young team. I'm excited about the wide range of outcomes and particularly what is going to happen in that San Diego game.
Yeah, with the victory of Oakland's only being by 1 goal, it just sets up an absolute can of worms for if LA gets a pretty sizable win at home this weekend. And 2 players who are really going to be X factors, one on each squad that weren't available or active last weekend. Mac Hecht is back for Oakland. He's missed a couple of games. He was most notably out for the game against Colorado that Oakland won. He was also out this last weekend against the Aviators. So their leading passer this season ostensibly has been inactive in their 2 biggest wins at home. Just a little bit of an asterisk note there. And then for LA, we mentioned it earlier, but Chris Mazur will be returning to the lineup. They will absolutely need him and his throwing talent wherever they decide to insert him. He's been mostly available on D-line, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him go out there for some offensive possessions if it's a tight game or if they're just feeling like he's in rhythm. He's been somebody who has been a top performer on many, many playoff teams in this league. He stands to be very important for them in their final game of the 2023 regular season. Should we continue to talk about this, or do you want to move on to the rest of the playoff slate? I feel pretty good on that. All right, let's move on. So the only other division that has any real playoff, I think, intrigue as far as fulfilling playoff spots, we'll get to the South Division. South has a little bit to say yet in Week 13. But biggest news of note is in the East Division. Boston right now sits 1 win away from just clinching their first ever playoff berth in 3 seasons as a franchise. They sit at 6-5. They will host the 0-10 Montreal tomorrow night on AUDL.tv. Again, all Glory need to do is win, and they are in. However, Toronto is still alive and well as far as they're considering in the playoff chase. They have an absolutely hard as hell road schedule in the final weekend of the regular season. Then they need to both win both their games at DC and then at Philadelphia, and have their countrymates from Montreal defeat Boston. That is the only scenario that that Toronto can advance to the postseason. Otherwise, it will be Boston. If they're both 7-5, Boston qualifies to the head-to-head tiebreaker. If Toronto loses either of their games, doesn't matter if Boston loses to Montreal, then Boston would qualify for the 2023 postseason. So
give it a percent chance that Toronto gets in the playoffs.
5. I mean,
5. That's surprisingly high. I'm gonna say it's surprisingly high.
It's one of those things where I feel like, and we talked about this, the Boston-Montreal matchup is not favorable almost in any way for the Royale. The way Boston has been playing, particularly on defense, and the historic offensive struggles that Montreal has had this season and just scoring the damn disc kind of come to a head, right? And it looks like Boston will have a near-strength full rotation of D-line starters. They will be without Tyler Chan, very notably, obviously, but they will have a lot of their bigs. Phil Joyce, Gus Halflin, Chris Bartoli will be available. It just feels like Boston and how they approached that matchup 2 weeks ago on the road in Philly and in DC. They have a locked in competitive nature that frankly I think has eluded the Glory in their first 2 seasons as a franchise, and they look like a different team in 2023. They look like they can actually take care of business. This was a Boston team that came into existence in 2021 and was 1-0, facing Atlanta in the second week of the season, having a lead late in the second half, and I think even a 4-goal lead at one point before Atlanta battled back and, of course, kind of seized the early season momentum in 2021. But the Glory have had talent in the past. They've clearly competed at various times with some of the top teams in the AUDL. I remember in 2022 also, they had a good early season game against the New York Empire. This is a Boston team that has competed in fits and spurts, but in 2023, it really feels like it's all kind of come together for them. And I like their lineups, man. I like the rotations. I like how the offense looks. Kalen McSweeney, the rookie, looks, as we've talked about, a carbon copy of Cole Davis-Brand, who will be inactive, but stands the reason that McSweeney, Sadok, Ray Tetro, Simon Carapella, that has been such a good core for them all season and just can produce seemingly from their own motors. And from again, a Montreal team that has competed at times, it feels like a very tall task, especially when they also have to then go on the road the next night and face this little team called the 11-0 New York Empire in New York.
By the way, the Montreal New York game,
by like 20.
Obviously, that game is not going to matter for anything, regardless of what other results happen. But it is sort of interesting when we talk about the MVP race and just in terms of final statistics, like how many more assists can Ryan Ozziar throw? How many more goals can Jeff Babbitt score? How many blocks can Jeff Babbitt get to? Like, can he get to the 20 block thresholds? There's going to be some statistical watch intrigue to that game.
I think for me at this point, I don't know if stats are going to do the difference between those two in particular. Maybe elsewhere, maybe in some other dialogues. I feel like if we're just narrowing it down to the player on New York who kind of claims it through best player on best team, most impressive performance, similar to how Osgar won last year and how Yacht won the 2 years before. A lot of New York Empire MVPs around this time of year. I feel like it's got to be Babbitt, man. It's still like when I just think about this season, when I think what's motivated it, when I think about all the tricky spots that they get into and everything else, it just feels like it's that dude blitzing the front cone and kind of smiling on everyone and making it look too easy, right? Like, he did it again last week.
It's never happened where the MVP hasn't been like anything of a thrower, right?
But I feel I feel like this is the year where that might change. I feel like given the body of work that Babbitt has submitted, given the block numbers too, and the just like imposing nature of what it means to face that New York offense, knowing that even if you get a turnover against them, even if you somehow prevent them from getting inside the red zone and letting Jack and Ryan Osgar just do whirling dervish give and go routines on you, even if you avoid all of that and get a holy turnover against the Empire, you then have to go against Babbitt sharking around out there somewhere. Like it's similar to what Carolina has had for years in Jacob Fairfax. There's something about having like an A1 defender as your leading receiver on offense that is a very impactful piece that I think, like, given our relatively Stone Age statistics at this point, it's hard to really draw what kind of impact that player has. But it stands to reason when you have a stopper like Babbitt, it adds a level to like just the kind of pure goal scoring rhetoric we sometimes have around a player of his type. But I don't know, man, like it's also the fact, I think too, there's more visible chatter and just the way that opponents are even talking about New York and Babbitt. He always becomes the focal point. It's always kind of talking about him almost in a Voldemort sense, right? Like, oh, we're going to strategize here. Here's how we can like maybe get touches away from Osgar and Jack Williams. Here's maybe how we can, keep more consistency about defense. And then it's like, okay, well, how are you going to deal with Jeff Babbitt? Has anyone figured that out yet? Has anyone figured out a basic formation to keep him away from the front cone and away from scoring buzzer beaters? Did we all see what he did to Joel Clutton last week, where he snowplowed that man 3 yards and then jumped up over the backside? I mean,
he bullied the runner-up to the Defensive Player of the Year award.
And to Clutton's credit, it's his second game of the season. He got one live game rep against Portland Nitro a week before, and then he has to come in and defend arguably the MVP of the league, who's an absolute runaway freight train at this point. I give him his credit, but it was pretty eye-opening to watch how easily he moved a 6'5" person in Joel Clutton. Like, he just kind of went, oh, that's my space now. I mean, I've talked about this with a few other people. He's Shaq at this point. There's an indescribable dominance, and when he decides to actually apply his foot to the accelerator, there's simply not an individual in this league that can tell him to stop or to even slow him down, really, at this point. You have individual plays like the Sandy Brown block, but I don't know, man.
I gotta rewatch, because I'm looking back at Babbitt's game-to-game stats. I gotta rewatch that DC game and look for Babbitt in that, because he only scored one goal against DC. Like, was it just
in the home game?
Need him to do much?
He also sustained a little bit of an almost scary like thwack on the head the week before in a game. And I think they might have been taking it a little bit easier on just feeding him that game. But yeah, I mean, but look at the first game against DC this year. I mean, that was kind of his full formation of an MVP season, where he had, 7 goals and 3 blocks in the week 3 overtime win. I mean, just about as dominant as you can get on both sides of the disc. So, anyways, we digress. The last scenario we just wanted to touch on was in the South Division. Obviously, the seeding and everything is taken care of in that division. However, with Atlanta hosting Carolina in the final week of the regular season, there is still something on the line for the regular season division champs in the hustle. If they get a win, they will virtually avoid the possibility of becoming the 4 seed at championship weekend and very likely drawing New York in a semifinals matchup. Obviously, this is a few orders removed from where we are currently. There's still a few games to win. They still have to win a South Division playoff game in order to make it to championship weekend, which will be a tall order against either Austin or Carolina.
And there's no guarantee that New York is at championship weekend either. I know you're keeping your DC champions pick alive too.
I don't know if I am anymore, man. I like DC a lot. It's just hard to ignore a certain amount of inevitability.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
They just start to feel that way, especially with what they just did out west, the New York Empire, of course. But I don't know. Yeah, like you say, like anything could happen. And as we've talked about numerous times, these 2023 playoffs are really shaping up to be something else, I think. I think that there's intrigue throughout every division as to who could possibly win it. You know, it felt like there was kind of a favoritism, I feel like, in each of the divisions. In the East, New York was very clearly in the South. It felt like Carolina had kind of moved up over the last couple of seasons. In the West, Colorado was a heavy favorite to win that division coming into this year, given the pieces that they added and everything that they've been building off of in their first season. And then the Central, it felt like Minnesota was a pretty clear advantage. But I feel like Indy is going to still challenge them at some point in the playoffs, possibly Chicago if they win that first playoff game. But again, we're getting off into the weeds. We'll get more into playoff talk next week. But that should pretty much do it for our Week 13 preview episode. We're going to keep it pretty short this week, even though, again, there will be 14 games for you to consume on watch.audl.tv. Big blowout regular season finale weekend in the AUDL. And of course, setting up for an absolutely epic 2023 playoffs, which will begin on July 29th with the first round of divisional playoffs across the league. You can check in on the AUDL.com website as well as AUDL social media for broadcasting and schedule information. Most, if not all, of the games are already locked up, even through the divisional championship weekend as far as dates and locations. So if you're curious about those things, go and look it up. There are going to be some absolutely barn burner matchups. Again, the playoffs have just been incredible the last couple of years, so can't wait for all of that. That will wrap it up for us here and now, but we will be talking to you in just a few days, hopefully with a lot of more confirmation for those postseason talks, but possibly also a complete reversal of everything that we predicted. There still is the possibility that LA and Toronto somehow pull out playoff spots from this weekend. Boy, would that be something. We'll be tuning in alongside you. Thanks for tuning in here. Bye now.